My name is Ali, I'm a doctor and YouTuber.
I'm Tamor, I'm a data scientist and writer.
And you're listening to Not Overthinking,
the weekly podcast where we think about happiness, creativity, and the human condition.
Hello and welcome back to Not Overthinking. Tamor, how are you doing today?
I'm actually pretty knackered, mate. It's been a long day. We had a little lunch party, which extended into the evening. So we had some guests, which just left.
Yeah, I feel like I timed my arrival pretty well.
You did. You didn't do any of the house cleaning.
I got here at, I think it was 1 p.m. and the guests were arriving by 2 p.m., which was a real blow to me when I arrived because I assumed they'd arrive at 1 p.m. and I would arrive
just as dinner was being served.
Yeah, I was going to swoop in with the lemons and the creme fraiche that you messaged me to bring over. So I was feeling pretty smug.
But you had to do about an hour of cleaning.
Exactly, yeah. How was the morning?
It was rough, mate. I'm not going to lie to you. Did I do some groceries? I did some groceries yesterday, and then I had to do some more groceries today. Then I had to do some cleaning. Yeah, it was fine, you know. All in a day's work. How are you doing? You've had your first full week of unemployment. Is that right?
First full week of unemployment.
Yeah.
It's been supremely unproductive.
Really? I'd love to dig into this. You did a good tweet. I can't remember the exact phraseology, but it was something along the lines of, you're actually less productive on the YouTube stuff now than you were when you had a full-time job distracting you from it.
Yeah, exactly. It's been okay. I feel like there's been a bit of a confounding factor because I've been quite ill this week. So since like Tuesday of this week, I've had like a really bad cough and I was feeling feverish. Probably associated with the fact that on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday it was like super, super hot as well. But I was convinced that I might have coronavirus. And so I got myself tested on like Friday and, you know, that came back negative. So it's all good.
You were kind of disappointed that it came back negative, weren't you?
I'd filmed the whole testing procedure. And, you know, this would have been a good video. I was planning the thumbnail already, just like me looking absolutely destitute. So with like, I was going to Photoshop fake some like sort of, I don't know, like my face to look more like flushed and erythematous than it usually is. And right. I've been planning all this out for the thumbnail.
Yeah.
And then the freaking test comes back negative.
It's like how the day before like election results, all the newspapers, they like prepare both versions of the next morning's front page. Like
exactly.
If Trump wins and if Hillary wins.
Exactly that, just in case.
Yeah.
So it came back negative. So I've lost that piece of content as potential.
Outside of the content, were you kind of hoping for it just for a bit of like excitement or drama or something?
No, I wasn't really at all. I think had it come back positive, I would have felt better about the entirely unproductive way I'd spent that week.
Oh, I see.
Because I just like couldn't really bring myself to do anything work-wise. And I don't know. I don't like being the sort of person who's like, oh, well, I'm ill, therefore I should take a break.
Right.
Because that just seems like, you know, the standard thing to do. Whereas what I thought is, you know, I should be more productive here. But then I was just like very generally lethargic and spent about 30 hours listening to Audible this week.
Nice. Okay.
Speaking of Audible, this episode is brought to you by Brilliant. What is Brilliant, Tamor?
Brilliant is the best way to teach yourself anything mathsy online. So maths, computer science, physics. It really is very good. It's not like school stuff. It's really focuses on helping you develop real understanding and intuition. I say this every time, but I really do mean it. Honestly.
Yeah, and it's actually looked at with respect by the maths community that you consider yourself to be a part of.
Yeah. The maths community, the maths education community in particular, in which I'm embedded. Yeah, it's a great service. How can listeners capitalize on this offering?
Well, listeners can capitalize on this offering and indirectly thereby allow us to capitalize on the offering by visiting brilliant.org/notoverthinking. And the first 200 people to hit that URL will get 20% off the annual premium subscription. It's very reasonably priced. You can teach yourself like really good stuff about maths, computer science, physics, problem solving, all that good jazz.
Great stuff. Big thank you to Brilliant.
Yeah, so I've been listening to a load of Audible this week. I've been just like blitzing through the Wheel of Time series. Yeah. And I'm on the final book now, and I'm going to be so sad when it ends because it's just so good. It's the whole like audiobook thing is like imagine something like Naruto, which is like, you know, 600 episodes worth of thingy. But imagine having that experience over an extended period of time while you're doing other things.
Yeah.
There's like nothing that beats that. Like for me to get into Bleach right now, I'd have to devote weeks and weeks of my life just sitting in front of a TV watching Bleach.
Yeah.
But, you know, any audiobook series, it's just so good.
Yeah, I've been doing a bit of audiobooking this week myself. I've now listened to the a little known saga called Harry Potter. I've listened to the first 2 Harry Potter audiobooks.
Oh, the Stephen Fry ones.
Yeah.
How are they?
The narration is good. I just think I just find it a bit underwhelming, man. Like I've seen the movies. I know what happens. It just feels it's quite comfortable, just like reminiscing and kind of hearing a story that I already know. So it's not super engaging to us. I don't know if I'm going to listen to the 3rd, 4th, 5th. I've read the 6th and 7th books.
Okay. Well, I mean, I've got 3 years worth of fantasy audiobook recommendations if you would consider listening to fiction.
Maybe I should try one of those. But yeah, I do find that if I have something I'm looking forward to listening to, I'm much more likely to take out the trash and do the dishes and all these things, because then it's like, oh, sick. Yeah, I can listen to my audiobook.
Yeah, mate, like I think like back in the day, I used to regard any time not spent on the computer as being unproductive. Now I regard any time not spent on the computer or not listening to an audiobook as being unproductive. So I've expanded my horizons a little bit.
It's good to see that you're growing.
Yeah, I think I'm growing a lot as a person in that regard.
Right. So back to your lack of productivity. So are you really just like chalking it all down to the fact that you were unwell?
I'm chalking a large majority of it down to the fact that I was unwell.
What's your mindset like with regards to the YouTube stuff now? Because personal anecdote, I definitely found that when Causal was my naughty little side project that I was doing on the evenings and weekends.
We need to get over your recent phraseology. Spank me daddy, I've been a bad boy. Naughty little side project. I don't know what you've been doing in your spare time, but this is problematic. Turn that Slack notification off. I hate that sound.
Yeah, so I think, back when I didn't think of Causal as my work, it was, I think I had a different mindset. I'd always be itching to like, oh man, I can sneak another like half an hour of like Causal in. Whereas now, for example, like for the past couple of days, I've been, we need to sort out our documentation for Causal. We get lots of messages and emails saying like, hey man, like the documentation's out of date. The product's cool, but like the documentation's out of date. Get lots of people asking us the same question of like, oh, how does this thing work? And so it's now like long overdue that we sort out the documentation. And I've kind of been being very like slow and sort of putting it off as much as I can. Because I'll be honest with you, writing this documentation feels like work. And in my head, Causal is now work. And so now I try and sneak off away from Causal.
So you sit in the bathroom for an hour watching David Dobrik?
Well, I've got my Nintendo Switch light in the bathroom, so that's my Switch time.
Yes, I saw that you've been putting the Switch on top of the bathroom bin.
Yes.
It's very hygienic, but I'm sure it's fine.
Yeah, so like, back when the doctor thing was your work and the YouTube thing was your mistress, if you will. Like, how is it now? Like,
Yeah, it kind of feels like work. I don't know to what extent that is just the feeling of it, kind of me being unwell, but I think it definitely now does feel a lot like work. Like I had to really talk myself into filming yesterday's video, which I filmed because I was like, okay, no, we've got to get this video on Tuesday.
Yeah.
We were even planning to have a video out on Friday and on Sunday of this week. But I kind of decided that, I'm ill, who cares, it's fine. Yeah. And like, ironically, the subscriber growth has been better than it would have been.
Oh, nice.
had I published these videos. So it's really starting to make me think that, in a way, like, what am I really optimizing for?
Yeah.
What's the game that I'm playing?
Yeah.
What are the victory conditions of that game? My usual spiel that I give to medical students, I'm now having to turn on myself.
Right. Yeah, I think the feeling like work thing is bizarre. And I think it's all these stupid societal narratives, about like work and life and these being like separate things or whatever. Like it's absolutely bizarre, but I think it is a weird framing that definitely holds me back, and it seems like it's sort of affecting you as well.
Yeah, it's like for example, like I have no qualms about, for example, staying up till 10, 11 midnight, like doing some coding or designing a website or writing a video script and stuff back when it was my hobby as opposed to when it was my work. But now that it's now my work, I kind of think, I get to like 8, 9 PM. I'm like, oh, I've had a good day. I'll have a break.
Yeah.
And then I will just kind of do nothing or just like sit on the sofa doing an online course in brilliant.org/not overthinking. Do something completely unproductive. And I feel like if I just have the mentality of, as long as I continue to enjoy it, then just continue doing the thing. I feel like I'd probably have more of a positive time of it, rather than thinking, okay, it's 8 p.m. I should now get into my wind down time, and now I should do something that isn't obviously not work. So I don't know. It's a bit of a weird one. I've still only had it for about a week, so
Guess we need some more data.
a few more data points to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that I've kind of been thinking about. I mean, it's very much related to the conversation we had with Paul. What was it, last week or 2 weeks ago or something? Paul Millard. You should definitely check that episode out. It was about like the concept of leisure, like true leisure or whatever. I think I read a tweet that someone quote, which was something like, when we, if you're like working and you want to take a break from work, you can watch like an hour of YouTube. You can watch like 2 hours of YouTube, and you still won't really feel refreshed. You still will feel like, it'll be like two hours of alleged relaxation, and you'll feel surprisingly unrefreshed. Whereas if your break is 15 minutes of sitting there and doing nothing and just like thinking about stuff, after that 15 minutes, you will feel like that was great. I want to get back to work. And so I think there's something around like active leisure, and I feel like a lot of the doom scrolling and stuff like that. It's sort of like passive leisure, which isn't actually that enriching. So, for example, my new mistress is like trying to read more about a couple of topics that I'm sort of interested in, where I've found some like PDFs and books and things. And so that's the thing of like, oh yeah, I can get back to my laptop, I can open up Rome, and I can start like reading this PDF and making notes and stuff. That's like my new mistress. And
we really have to work on the framework.
It definitely feels better than me taking like YouTube breaks and things like that. And the thing you said of like, oh, well, when I'm winding down, I have to now do something that doesn't feel like work. What is that like? What kind of leisure is that?
Like, I don't know. I feel like I rarely feel the need to wind down. But I feel like I should feel the need to wind down because of the societal narrative around it's okay to take a break, and hustle culture is toxic and all this sort of stuff. And so I feel like unless I've sort of actively written the day off and I'm like, you know what, this is fine, I'm going to order takeaway and I'm just going to lie on the sofa for the next 6 hours listening to the Wheel of Time series on Audible, that is very refreshing because it's the sort of like guilt-free relaxation. Whereas I'm going to take a break, I feel like if I've had a good day of work, if I feel like I've been productive during the daytime, then I have no qualms about kind of stopping the work because I will have gotten a reasonable amount done. But like, for example, these past couple of days, I've been waking up at like 10 a.m., 11 a.m., kind of making a coffee, having breakfast, then it's noon, and then I'm like, oh, well, I guess it's time for lunch now, warm up lunch, watch some Hunter x Hunter or random YouTube videos, and then I'm like, okay, it's 1 o'clock, I'm feeling kind of tired, let me just go on the sofa and scroll for a bit. Then I freaking discover Facebook videos. Have you seen how addictive Facebook video is now?
No, I haven't.
It's sort of like TikTok in that it's just like vertical scrolling through it. There's two specific genres of Facebook videos that I've been addicted to. One is clips from the Graham Norton show.
Oh, mate.
It's really good. The other one is clips from the ATP tennis.
What's ATP?
ATP is like one of those like tennis tournament type things. But it's like, Roger Federer's 10 best shots or...
Oh, that kind of stuff.
Kind of best shots from Wimbledon 2012, stuff like that. And I spent like an hour watching clips from tennis, like yesterday on the sofa. And at the end of it...
Did you feel refreshed?
No, absolutely not.
Right.
It was one of those things, it was like a guilty pleasure that I was taking away from what I felt I should have been doing, which was something productive. And therefore, I kind of hated myself at the end of it.
Yeah.
Despite having now seen 10 of Roger Federer's best shots.
Damn. I've got a life hack for you that's been working wonders for me this week.
Yeah?
The issue with all these life hacks is that there's diminishing returns. Like, they work while they're still novel, and then you kind of, ignore them or whatever.
Yep.
The life hack is that I've told myself this, I've like told myself that, look, I'm in full control of my life. I do whatever I want when I want. And that's the best way to live. I make the rules. And then whenever I'm, when I'm like doing something, I ask myself, like, what do I really want to be doing right now? And for example, like if I find myself like doom scrolling in bed in the morning or something, I've actually been pretty good about that this week. But if I find myself like just scrolling through social media at any point, within like a minute or something, I'll catch myself doing that and I think, what do I actually want to be doing right now? And then I will generally conclude that actually I don't want to be scrolling through social media right now. I might conclude that I don't fancy like doing causal stuff at the moment. Maybe I'll like, do some reading or something. Or I might conclude that, no, I do actually want to like do this causal thing. It's pretty good. We got a good thing going. And then I'll kind of stop doing the social media thing, because I know that if I'm not doing what I want to be doing, I'm the mug, like that's just stupid. And so just like actively asking myself, like, what do I like really want to be doing right now? It's basically never scrolling through social media. It's basically never like watching random YouTube videos. Like if I want to be doing not work, it'll be like, I actually want to play like a bunch of like Super Smash Bros, or like I want to read this thing or whatever. And I find that's good.
Okay. That's a good one, because it's like scrolling through social media is the very bottom of the totem pole in terms of actual things that are fun and relaxing.
Right.
There's always, I feel like there are multiple things you and I could be doing that are above that, but it's just that it's so easy to just get out and scroll through Instagram.
Yeah.
I found that the other day I happened to have my Kindle just on like resting on the sofa, and so instead of doom scrolling, I just picked up the Kindle and started reading. Nice. And I felt really good at the end of that, because I was like, oh, this is actually what I want to be doing. I'm reading this book. It's cool. It's very interesting. Blah blah blah. So yeah, cool. I'll try that. That's a good way of thinking about it. What do I actually want to be doing right now?
Yeah. Maybe you can milk a few videos out of that one.
I'm sure I can. I'm sure Angus will milk a few Instagram clips out of this as well.
Okay, so on to today's topic. Actually, the pre today's topic.
Okay, maybe we can milk 2 episodes out of this then.
Yeah, let's see how long this goes. I've been having... Actually, first of all, I had a great social interaction this week.
Oh.
I had a friend over for dinner who I never met before.
Okay.
And he was introduced to me by a guy I follow on Twitter who also follows me. So this guy and I have been Twitter mutuals for a few months' time. We like each other's tweets and stuff. And he messaged me last week or something saying, hey, my friend is going to, is moving to London from the US. I think you guys would enjoy hanging out. It's like, cool, yeah, let's do it. And then so this week, this chap came over for dinner. I can't/won't give too many details, but it turned out that he'd just gotten out of prison. he'd been in prison for the past 3 months.
Not funny.
And
God.
he just had like very interesting stories about what that experience is actually like.
Okay, so keep it PG.
No, it was all fairly PG. But yeah, very interesting chap. I'd been watching like prison documentaries to try and understand that world a bit. And yeah, it was just very interesting to have someone who, on the face of it, similar kind of background and similar, whatever as me, someone who I'd see as my tribe. Doing some jail time.
Okay, why was that interesting?
One of the interesting things was just how warped it seems on the inside. Like it's where things kick off over like the smallest incidents, or like this, the smallest slight will like kick off a race war inside the prison and that kind of stuff.
Okay.
So I think that the bubble aspect of it seemed quite interesting. And when I was watching Louis Theroux documentary about the same thing, this is also something Louis picked up on, where he asked like the inmates, like, you're really gonna kill this guy over his shoe? Like, doesn't that seem a bit weird to you? In Louis' kind of way, doesn't that seem a bit weird to you? Something like that. Just like the bubble kind of nature of it. And it kind of reminded me a bit of the bubble nature of university, where like the weirdest, bizarrest little things lead to like like a huge deal.
Yeah. Like, damn, that Cecil Rhodes guy.
Yeah.
Wasn't that big a deal.
And so that was one thing. I think another interesting thing was that he felt that it felt like he'd actually bonded with some people and like made some real friends or whatever, but those friendships or alliances or whatever could actually turn sour really quickly. And he kind of felt that it's actually very difficult to really build deep, meaningful bonds with people there, because there's so much like distrust that even if like you think some guy's your closest mate or something, you know, the next day, if you like say one wrong thing or something that they might take offense at, then like they'll just like, you know, turn on you kind of thing. That was pretty interesting.
So how violent was this guy's experience in prison?
No, it wasn't especially violent. I think he had a reasonable time.
He got into prison.
Sorry?
He was in a pretty cushy prison.
It wasn't a cushy prison. There are actually, from what I hear, you know, they're not called cushy prisons, but yeah, there are those kinds of places. But it was like a prison. He managed to mostly stay out of any conflicts. There were a couple of like things like that sort of kicked off, but you know, he mostly sort of stayed safe. And he's not a big guy, so you know, could have been dangerous. But yeah, that was pretty interesting social interaction I had this week. Anyway, the real pre-topic thing was I've had conversations with a few friends in the past week or two about the whole workism stuff that we were talking to Paul about.
Yeah, same.
And I found it's been quite interesting. I think one sort of pattern that I've seen is that when I'm having these conversations, people tend to sort of assume that I'm saying all aspects. Well, actually, I think one big thing is like everyone seems to have a different definition of work, and so most people's default definition seems to be that work is basically anything apart from like sitting on the couch. You know, like if you're not basically doing nothing, you're doing work. For example, if you're like writing a blog, you're doing work.
Recording this podcast is work.
This would be like work or whatever. And so I think in these discussions, it's helpful to actually kind of define the terms a little bit because, well, I guess I just sort of assume that, yeah, I'm in my own bubble of, you know, reading about this stuff and thinking about this stuff where it seems to me that that's not a meaningful definition of work.
Okay, so how are you defining work?
Sorry?
How are you defining work then? Because that's one thing I've actually been thinking about, like what is work? But I feel like I've less in a kind of semantic context and more in a holistic kind of philosophical sense.
I think it's helpful to have some like money part of it. You know, it's something that you're doing at least in part in order to make money. You know, I think that's important because it implies that, and it implies a little bit of a lack of agency. Like, you know, everyone broadly needs to make money somehow, and so if you were thinking about, you know, how would I most want to be spending my time? You know, you don't get to do that because you need to spend some of your time somehow making some money, right? And so I think that's a meaningful component of it. Like work is probably something that you are doing in part in order to make money.
So for example, if you were to imagine your ideal life, assuming money was no object, and then look at your life, assuming money is some kind of object, work is that difference between the two things.
Yeah. I'm not trying to lay down any hard boundaries here. I'm more trying to just like approximate the space. But yeah, I think there's a money component. I think there's a component of like, yeah, I think yeah, I guess that's like the main thing, maybe.
So this is what Vicky Robbins says in the book, Your Money or Your Life. Have you read this?
No.
I think you should. Like, you would enjoy it, especially now that you're into the workism stuff. It's the framing of the book is more that it's like a sort of guide to personal finance, but a lot of the comments that she makes at the start are very much about this workism stuff. And her argument is that really the only thing that defines work is the fact that you're making money from it. And that is therefore the definition of work. It's that thing that you're doing for the money. Okay. And she says that a lot of us like to define work in other ways, like, you know, that thing that I get meaning from, that thing that I get social interaction from, and that thing that gives me a challenge, an intellectual challenge and whatnot. And she says that you can get all of those things from non-work activities, and therefore the thing that actually defines work is what are you doing to make money? Yeah.
To be honest, I disagree with that actually now that I think about it. I think the salient aspect of the money thing is that it comes back to the lack of complete agency. Not the complete lack of agency, but the lack of complete agency. Like, you know, to some extent, you know, you have to do something to make money. And so it kind of narrows your options down. And so, like, you know, you won't be like 100% doing a work thing completely out of choice. And I think there are also like non-monetary things that you still have to do out of, you know, that you're obligated to do which will feel like work, and I think which
Like taking out the trash and stuff.
depends how you view taking out the trash, but I'm thinking more significant things. Like, for example, let's say you have like a family member that's like really unwell, and you have to care for them for like many hours a day.
Okay.
I think that would be reasonably considered work, and I think the reason for that is the lack of agency. Like, you basically have to do this thing, right? So I'd say like the important.
Would raising kids feel like work? Because you have you haven't got a complete sense of agency there. It's the thing that you have to do. You're not getting paid for it. It feels similar to the caring for a family member example.
Yeah, potentially.
But then I feel like we're muddling up. Defining work that broadly means that a lot of... I feel like how can you make comments about the nature of work if you're including raising a family as being work?
Fair.
Like that's not what we're talking about when we're talking about a culture of workism. Like, people don't say like, what do you do expecting, like, it's just not a thing.
Man, my stupid kids, I'm like raising them all the time. Okay, yeah, fair. Yeah. All right, yeah, I'm happy to narrow it down to the money thing.
Okay. So you said you've been having chats with people about this.
Yeah, so I think one thing that it's helpful to do in these chats is to kind of define what you mean by work. I think the other thing is that most people, maybe this is just poor communication on my part, but most people seem to assume that what I'm trying to say is that all aspects of work are bad, and that we need to sort of
abolish work.
Abolish work.
Defund work.
Yeah, defund work, exactly. Whereas what I'm really trying to say is that we just need like a cultural correction in the other direction of workism. And so, in these conversations, people will be like, well, work has benefits, there's like socializing, gives you a sense of purpose, meaning, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, of course it does. It does all those things, and that's great. But I'm not trying to say it doesn't do those things. So I found that, I guess this is like it's the kind of... argumentation is the wrong word, but like it's the kind of thing you might read online about, like, how to convince people. First, try and validate their position. And so I think maybe it's useful to start off by saying, if you're trying to convince someone that this workism thing is an actual problem, start off by saying, look, work has some benefits. It's where we get some meaning. It passes the time. Makes some money. Like, there's some pretty good things about work. But it's a bit weird. There's like this bad thing. That kind of approach. So I think that's probably a better way to have these conversations.
So what's your... Have you got like a list in your head of sort of bad things about work?
No, that's the thing. I also haven't like properly sort of condensed my actual thoughts and feelings about this. And so oftentimes when I'm trying to talk to people about it, this like this sort of meme picture of this guy standing in front of a pinboard, like looking kind of crazy, and then there's all these like this red thread leading to lots of different things, and it's like he's trying to explain so like it's crazy conspiracy theory thing. I feel like when I have an idea that I feel strongly about, but I haven't like properly ordered and arranged my thoughts about it, I feel a bit like that where I'm basically going like, there's a work thing, man. Come on.
There's something wrong here.
Can't you see it?
There's something wrong and I can't quite figure it out yet.
Yeah.
I really liked one of Paul's threads, which is about... I really liked one of Paul's threads that I read in its entirety today, which was about the accidental meaning in life.
Right.
I guess, I'm sure you've come across this one. But now this is something that I'm sort of... I think when it comes to these sorts of conversations... It's useful to have a few bits that you can call upon when you need to. And I think accidental meaning is a good bit to have.
That is nice, yeah.
So for our listeners, Paul Millard's theory about accidental meaning is that the kind of boomer generation found their lives to be quite meaningful. And the boomer generation is also the generation that was like, stick to the same company, work your way up over a 50-year period, get promoted every 10 years along the way, and you will live a happy life. And his main argument his argument is that because of the way that society was structured at the time, and this is less the case now, because of the way society was structured, people found meaning in their lives, but this was accidental meaning not related to the work. They found the meaning because, firstly, fewer people lived in cities, more people lived in like small towns and suburbs and stuff. Secondly, generally there was a stay-at-home parent. Thirdly, generally both parents took an active role in the community. Fourthly, community was like more of a thing. You would be friends with your neighbors. You'd go to your local church. All of these things, you would get married. You would probably live in the same place for a long time. You would have some kids. You would attend the church. You would go to local events. You would join the school's committee, like whatever. All of these things would lead to you staying in one place, building up these connections as community, and therefore your life would have a sense of meaning because you've got the relationship side sorted. And alongside, it just so happened that you were working at the same company, which allowed all this to happen. And his point is that, therefore, the meaning came accidentally based on a result of how society was structured.
Yeah, it wasn't actually a bad setup back then.
Yeah, whereas nowadays, you could be doing the sort of working your career, working the corporate ladder, like whatever you want to do. But you actually have to think a lot harder about getting the meaning in your life because nowadays we are less concerned about living in the suburbs and sort of getting in touch with our local community. We're less concerned about one of the parents always being at home to look after the kids and to build a community. We're less concerned about going to church and local community events. You and I hardly know who the hell our neighbors are, which was, I think, unheard of like 50 years ago. So now it's not a case of you work your way up the corporate ladder and your life just happens to be meaningful. Yeah. It's more a case of, fine, do what you want for work, but recognize that you have to put effort in to find meaning.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great stuff. I back that. That's a pretty good summary of the thread. Did you just come up with that?
Yeah, man.
Wow.
I phrased it once. Some girl interviewed me for a book that she's writing about 4 hours ago.
Oh.
And she asked me something about work, and I sort of spieled the accidental meaning thing. So I feel like sort of the fact that I've talked about it once,
yeah, that's helpful. Yeah,
kind of helps.
Yeah,
subsequent retellings of the story.
Did you give Paul credit? Or are you taking a claim on accidental meaning?
No, I did not give Paul credit in the interview, but he has credit in this podcast. That's another thing that like, to what extent do you cite your sources when talking about ideas? I think in general, probably the policy is to cite less rather than cite more.
Whose policy?
This is Derek Sivers' policy. It's also kind of my policy.
Okay.
Like I think it kind of depends on the context. In a long form podcast like this, it makes sense to cite the source. In a half an hour interview where someone's interviewing you for their book to try and find out stuff about your life, you don't want to.
What's the book?
It's something about how underdogs can achieve success, or something like that. I had.
She looked at you and thought, man,
this guy.
It's loser. Yeah. How did he do it?
I don't know. It's some college student in America who's like writing a book on the side and is trying to interview ostensibly successful people who have come from like less traditional backgrounds. I don't know what's non-traditional background, which is a point that I was like, look, man, I don't consider myself an underdog in the slightest. The privilege is stacked up in my favor. But yeah.
Good stuff. So yeah, I've been having these work conversations. It seems like you have as well. It seems like thoughts need to be condensed and organized in order to...
Yeah, we need some evergreen notes about
recruit.
work.
Recruit more people.
I found this evergreen notes thing is actually pretty legit. Like, how familiar are you with the evergreen notes vibe?
Is this Andy Matushak's post about it?
Yeah, and kind of the equivalent thing of the Zettelkasten method, Luhmann's Slipdog.
I haven't read that. I know all these words. I haven't read any of them.
Okay, no, fair enough. But basically, the idea behind evergreen notes is, at least my understanding of it, is that when you're taking notes from a source, you want to take literature notes, like, notes from the thing, but then you want to convert those into evergreen notes. And an evergreen note would be a note that makes a single point. So, for example, around the whole work thing, one of my evergreen notes is that work is synonymous with misery. And I would tag that as an evergreen note, and I would say, okay, this is the sort, so write up in my own words, work is synonymous with misery because blah, blah, and then say source like Naval, this podcast thingy.
Those are like the hooks for your bits that you then rattle off.
Yeah, exactly. And so then in my kind of general index system, I have kind of the topic of work, and one of my links underneath that is work is synonymous with misery. Another one underneath that would be, how do we decide what to do for work? That sort of stuff. So I think that's a good way of, like, at least I found it to be a good way of finding bits to hang my thinking off of.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, I think that's probably how I make notes. Anyway, but yeah, that's good stuff. Okay, just to this will be a brief, like, real topic, but I've started doing more digging into, how I've like gone on sort of crazy person style rants of like, man, we're not really mean to kids kind of thing.
Yeah, you're a big fan of the children.
Yeah. So I've been doing some digging into there. This was actually sparked by a podcast listener emailed in with a PDF recommendation. This listener, I don't know if it's I don't know how they identify, but they emailed this thing. Let me just get it up. So this is the newsletter of the American Philosophical Association, and it's the Feminism and Philosophy section of the newsletter. It's for spring 2020.
Wow.
And there's a phenomenal essay called Taking Children's Autonomy Seriously as a Parent by Quill Rebecca Kuckler. I think I'm probably butchering that. And this was... I read this a week ago. I read this on Sunday. It was like the highlight of I don't know what. It was like amazing to read this. It validated all these things that I was sort of vaguely thinking and couldn't quite put my finger on. And you kind of saying, I remember you made some sneering comment last time I went off on one about this. You're like, wait, no, arguably we take children too seriously. You have all these people, all these kids saying they're always stressed at school and stuff, and surely we shouldn't be listening to them or something. You made some kind of comment like that. And
thank you.
Yeah, so like, it just validated lots of things for me. Let me give you a summary of the essay.
Okay, so we've been going for 36 minutes so far. Are you sure you don't want to do it?
No. I haven't gone too deep on this yet. This is
okay. This is a preliminary.
This is a preliminary.
This is a teaser, if you will.
Basically, the way I'm thinking about this is that I need, I need to like figure out the best way to, structure this manifesto to get more people recruited for this cause. And similar to like the work thing, right? And so I think there's a few entry points that I think could be reasonable. And I think this essay is a really good start. Quill, she makes a few points in the essay about like why we actually treat children very immorally. And I think one caveat when having, I think one useful caveat in the workism discussions is that people sometimes like assume that I'm trying to say like the 95 is bad for everyone, nobody should have a day job. I'm not trying to say any of those things. I'm just trying to say that, we should have a different mindset when we think about these things. And similarly with this children's stuff, one way to misinterpret what I'm trying to say is to think I'm trying to be prescriptive about like, you should treat your child this way, or like people should treat their children this way. I'm not trying to say that. I'm trying to say that we should have a different mindset when we think about children. And, for some people, there might be no tangible difference between how they actually treat their kids, even if they have this different mindset. But I think the different mindset is an important starting point, right? And so one way in which we don't really treat children as people is, when we normally think about groups of people, there are some like ground level rules that we, recognize for like, this is how you should treat people, For example, it would be ridiculous and it would be unacceptable to say something like, I don't like Hispanics or I don't like lesbians. It would be very unacceptable to say that in, nowadays. But saying something like, I don't like kids, it's a pretty acceptable thing to say. You probably get people saying, oh my God, man, they're the worst. Hate them. Like, these are human beings. Imagine saying that about any other group of people. It would be ridiculous. And so, that's pretty weird, right? That kind of suggests that we're thinking about this in an unusual way. We also discount the testimony of children more so than we should. We also do weird things like just gaslighting them, straight up lying to them about like, hey man, this like Santa Claus guy gives you your presents every year. There's this tooth fairy, and then we think it's cute when they believe our lies. This would again be a very weird thing to do to other groups of people. Another major sort of difference is that we restrict where they can go and kind of what they can do to a much greater extent than we, would even think about restricting other people's lives. We decide, which hobbies we think the kid should have. We decide, which relatives the kid should hug. I'll go give so-and-so a hug and a kiss or whatever. Like, It's pretty weird. You know, imagine trying trying to control that with like someone you consider an actual person. That would be bizarre. And Quill says that, you know, children's autonomy rights is a phrase that she uses, are as strong and central to their flourishing as anyone else's. And one of our sort of core moral tasks as a, you know, this is from the perspective of a parent, she's a parent, one of our core moral tasks is to enhance and protect their autonomy as much as possible. And there are lots of weird cultural norms for parenting that push us against this. Like, you're almost seen as a good parent if you are being more restrictive to your kids. We associate good parenting with some level of oppression of, like, you know, oh man, like, you're sending them to hockey class and Kumon and all this kind of stuff. You're, man, great parent, you know, you've got them under lock and key. Good for you. That's, again, very weird thing if you consider any other group of people, right? And she says that there are two underlying ideologies at work here. The first is that we kind of see children as not full people. We don't see them as full people. We don't grant them like the same level of personhood that we would grant basically anyone else. Sure. And Quill says that this is not really valid. Like, you know, the reason, for example, you know, why do you think, if you were trying to justify why it's reasonable to treat children as not full people, what reason might you give?
They're young, the brain's not fully developed, they haven't got the capacity to make correct decisions, they're impulsive. Therefore, given that I have the best interests at heart, I would treat them in a way that I would treat a patient who lacks capacity. I would act in their best interests because it's what's best for them, even though they don't know it. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah, so you're kind of getting at this idea that they're not like independent, like, you know, they're not fully independent. And Quill says, look, this doesn't really make sense. Independence is not like a requirement for what she calls moral personhood. You know, if you think about like what constitutes a person, independence is not really one of those things, because if you think about it, we all, you know, our dependency on other people like fluctuates constantly in different domains and different ways across our lives. Right. And the moral ideal that we should, you know, try and reach is that we kind of, you know, for people who are dependent in some way, in some part of their life, we should, you know, support them while trying to let them maximize their autonomy as much as possible. Oh yeah, this is like a huge thing in medicine, right. like in like care of the elderly. Yeah, like, yeah, exactly. How do you recognize that the person is dependent in some way, and how do you sort of tweak the circumstances in a way that maximizes their autonomy? Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I was about to give that example. Like, if you have an elderly person who is now kind of dependent on other people to care for them, your mindset is not like, all right, this person's dependent, I own them, I decide everything about them. You know, this kind of, your mindset is, okay, this is a human being. You know, they're dependent on me in certain ways. And, you know, I will sort of help them as and when required. But as far as possible, I would like to give them as much autonomy as I can, right? It's just a very different mindset. And so this thing of like children aren't full people because they're dependent, we don't really apply the same standard to, for example, elderly people who are in many ways equally dependent as children, right? And there's a good book which Quill suggests, which I've read through. I feel like it's called Holding and Letting Go. And there's a quote from that book, which is that our moral task is to hold others in personhood when they are vulnerable and dependent, not to co-opt their personhood. So we want to, like, you know, hold on to their personhood rather than like taking over it, kind of thing. So that's one thing. One like weird ideology is like children aren't full people, and so it's justifiable to treat them in this way, right? The other ideology, and this is messed up. The other ideology is I mean, it's basically objectification, right? It kind of frames things as like children are like this product, and it's the parents' responsibility to create, you know, the best kind of product or a specific kind of product, you know, and you know, she says that this ties into like the stuff we see around like productivity culture. We kind of see kids as this thing that needs to be crafted in a particular way, and we try and like measure how well we've crafted them, that kind of stuff. And children are this like weird moral space where we are happy to justify
whatever means, as long as it gets to us to a good end, which is like some final result where we can judge the quality of the result and something. And so, when you hear people talking about, should teachers and parents be allowed to beat their kids or whatever, the kinds of arguments that you hear are like, well, actually, if you look at the research, if you beat your kids, they end up worse or something. Like, it's very like means to an ends argument. And, if you were to consider like, should we be physically abusing, X group of people?
Yeah.
And, the argument most people will go to is, no, that's immoral. And we've collectively decided we should not physically abuse people. The argument when it comes to kids is like, screw their like sort of status as part of the moral community, but like it actually leads to them becoming worse final products, and so that's why we shouldn't beat people. That's weird, right? That's like a weird way to think about a person. And again, like arguments, even something that's arguably less extreme than corporal punishment, you hear arguments against like tiger parents and helicopter parents. They basically control their kids, make them do all these things and keep them under lock and key. The arguments are not that this is a weird and immoral thing to do to another human being. The arguments are that, well, if you look at the stats, she's bad for the children. It doesn't foster creativity, blah, 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 blah. And it's just a weird way of looking at it, right? So I think these two ideologies, the first of like children aren't full people, and so it's justifiable to treat them in this way. And the second of like children are basically objects, that it's a parent's responsibility to kind of craft them into some final result that the parent or other people can then evaluate. All right, so those are two pretty weird things. Any thoughts on those before I make a few more points?
No, that all makes sense.
Yeah.
As in like, so I have token objections that come up in my mind when you're saying these things, but they're all like very token.
What do you mean?
As in, when you're saying that, oh, well, it's like that part of me that essentially accepts the status quo and is trying to come up with random arguments to attempt to argue against what you're saying. So when you're like, well, we should give kids more autonomy, then I'm thinking, yeah, but sometimes, I'm not going to give a kid autonomy to just cross the road for no reason. And
yeah. This comes back to my initial point. That's why
your
I made
point
this
is
point.
It's a mindset
Look,
shift.
I'm saying mindset. You might still conclude that I shouldn't let my kid run in front of a car. You probably should conclude that, but it's a different mindset, right? That we need. Another point she makes, which is quite interesting, is that usually when we think about power dynamics, whenever there's a position in which one party has sort of an extreme amount of power over another, we think about it very cautiously. So, relationships in the workplace between like a manager and their direct reports, we think, oh man, this is dangerous territory. There's a power dynamic. We want to be cautious about this. PhD supervisors and their students, the supervisor doesn't want to be too paternalistic about like telling their students exactly what they should be doing and stuff, because it's down to the student, right? And so usually when there's a strong power dynamic, we are cautious to try and be careful not to abuse that power. But when it comes to the power that parents have over children, like there's no thought given to it at all. It's like it almost feels like it feels like sometimes we see things as like children being owned by the parents, and like this power dynamic is right and just and all is well, whereas there's very obviously like a clear danger of abuse of that power. So I think that's it's an interesting point.
By that.
And yeah, there's like a few other like minor points. She names this thing called the minimum invasion principle, whereas like, you should only kind of invade people in order to stop them from harming themselves or from harming other people and stuff. And so this is kind of what we were saying about like, you want to give someone maximum autonomy while still taking care of their needs and things.
Yeah, I mean, I've often wondered about things like this, because obviously everyone would conclude that, I want to stop my kid from crossing the road because then otherwise he's going to die. I think that's a pretty uncontroversial thing to say. But for example, when it comes to, I'm going to make my kid pray 5 times a day because then he's less likely to go to hell.
Yeah.
Like, how do you?
Yeah. So I think this author would definitely think that's bad. She basically says that, of course we want our kids to turn out like good and happy, who contribute to society. We want them to share our values, but crucially we can't coerce them into doing all these things that we try and coerce them into doing. And so, yeah, I think she makes lots of very good points. I'm totally on board. I think that the two things that, that might be one issue with this, with what she's saying, is that her whole thing is predicated on this idea that like individual autonomy and independence is like a really important sort of thing. I think that's quite a modern view on things. I like broadly agree with it, but I think you might take issue with like the author holding like individual autonomy as like an aim. That if you take issue with that, you can reasonably take issue with the rest of this thing. And you might take issue with that, particularly if your framework for living comes from something like a religion, where you believe that this is the best way to live your life because it says so in the Quran and in the Bible, whatever, and it predicated on assuming that is the best way to live your life, you probably should get your kids to pray 5 times a day, go to church, whatever. That's probably the right thing to do if you truly believe in that stuff. So yeah, one issue is that like is like individual autonomy actually like the most important thing?
Yeah, this is something that we're going to talk a lot more about in our upcoming episode about the righteous mind, which kind of breaks down the 6 taste buds of morality, and talks about how essentially people on the left only really look at like, well, he says 3 of them, but really people on the left focus very much on the care harm foundation, as what is this thing harming people, and the liberty oppression foundation, like is are oppressed minorities being taken care of,
right?
Whereas people on the right, kind of the conservative people, would actually use all 6 moral taste receptors, the others being respect for authority, the principle of sanctity, and like a few others. And sort of you can see how people of that kind of leaning would say actually this idea that everyone deserves autonomy being like a fundamental, like the most important thing, the North Star, is actually flawed.
Right.
And it's equally important to respect sanctity and authority and to have stuff for the good of society. So that could be kind of where this falls down.
Yeah. And I think that's pretty defensible. So yeah, I think that is one issue with this. Another, and this isn't an issue with this, and this speaks more to the tangible, okay, how should I treat my kid versus like what's the right mindset. I think like when it comes to mindset stuff, all these points are very good. But basically, I think one big purpose of parenting is to help children make decisions that are in their long-term best interests, which the child might not be able to foresee or appreciate in the present, And so like when it comes down to a lot of the things of like, how much should I restrict my child's movements and things like that, I imagine most justifications for doing these things will be like, well, it's in the child's long-term best interests that they, go to this hockey lesson and blah, 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 blah. And yeah, I think that's fair, but I think it's a double-edged sword. I think there are a lot of like intellectual, maybe intellectual is the wrong word. There are a lot of trap holes you can fall into where you feel like you actually have you can actually evaluate well what the long-term benefit of things are. And so, a lot of parents might, promote their kids into like going down like the standard path of like, study this thing and, go work at this kind of company because, it'll give you like a stable job, that kind of stuff. I think there's a danger where, the parent might actually not be in a good position to judge, what's going to be a good economic move 30 years from now, stuff like that. And then I think there's also like another trap hole that you can kind of fall into is kind of pandering to your own comfort, like pandering to optics that make you feel good. And I think this is I haven't made a note about this in my Rome, but I think this is an example that she gives, which is that a lot of parents restrict the movement of their daughters far more than they restrict the movement of their sons, especially like, going out at night and things like that. And, if you ask them, why are you doing that? The first sort of justification is going to be, well, it's not safe. Who knows what's going to happen, all this kind of stuff. The author of the essay says that, well, actually, if you look at the numbers, all these dangers that you think there are when your daughter goes out at night are far more prevalent at school, in the workplace, blah blah blah. So like, if you think that's a real reason, then you're not really justified, because then you keep them basically locked up all the time. And then the parent might say, "Oh, okay, fine, that might be true, but I'd just be more comfortable knowing that she's not out there in the dark or whatever." And the author says that this is not really justifiable. Like, your personal comfort, does not trump another human being's kind of liberty. Basically, it comes back to, it's basically like an optics thing. The whole thing about like peeing in the sink, again, it's like a personal comfort thing of like, oh, that like looks icky or whatever. It's the same thing. Oh, looks kind of, it feels kind of weird if my daughter's like out alone at night or something. And yeah, so I think the sort of pandering to your own comfort and your own sort of weird optics is another potential trapdoor that might make you make bad decisions when you are deciding like tangibly, what restrictions should I impose on my child.
Yeah.
So that was, that was great stuff, man. And I think when having these conversations with people, I think I really need to stress the sort of mindset versus, actual practice thing. Because like, even after I told you that, the thoughts that were still going through your head, that you felt like were objectionable, but like actual practice stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So I think that's going to be really important when trying to recruit people for this cause. So that was one thing. So like, I'm very early on this journey. If any more listeners have really very interesting recommendations, please send them my way. This is great stuff. This is like my favorite thing right now. And now, just while we're on the topic, a couple of months ago, I listened to a good podcast episode. Oh, are you kidding me? I didn't make notes about it. Well, looks like I didn't make notes.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for listening. Should we? My God. Should we end by reading a review?
Yeah.
My phone is out of action because it's filming you.
Okay. Are you like more convinced of what I was trying to say before now? Like, this is a serious issue, right? This is a big deal, this kid stuff.
Yeah, I think I've never previously appreciated just how weird it is that when we think about kids these way, in this way.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting idea.
Do you think you will try and recruit people towards the cause once I have more of a manifesto?
Once you have more of a manifesto, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think also, so one thing I didn't like about the way that you're phrasing this stuff, and this is most likely just a function of the fact that you're just getting into this, is, for example, this discomfort, if I were a dad and my daughter's in some, I don't know, nightclub or something, and I have like a discomfort with that idea, I think it feels dissatisfying to say, for me to say that it's just a weird comfort thing. Like, I think it's important to understand this comes from a background of stuff, and understanding the stuff that particular discomfort comes from. Sort of being able to understand the parts before branding it as kind of weird. Which I get as, because you haven't explored much about this topic yet.
Yep. I'm on board. All right, this week's review comes from...
I want to read the review.
Oh,
because then we can put the clip, because you've had a few review clips.
Sorry, mate.
Wow. Oh, right. We have a review from Marty Serrano from the United States of America. It's titled 11 out of 10 Worth Catching Up To. So he or she says, I started listening to you guys 3 weeks ago and just finished listening to your Principles of Productivity episode. I relate when people say your podcast has changed our lives, but mostly because I find that the ideas or concepts you guys discuss are things I've thought about but haven't been able to properly articulate or solidify. I love the balance between banter and insight that comes with each episode, and I look forward to finally finishing the backlog of episodes I have yet to listen to. Just want to thank you guys for recommending The Courage to be Disliked. It's been a great read and super helpful with my social anxiety. Stay safe. Thank you very much, Marty. That's a lovely review. And if anyone's listening to this or watching this on the gram, check out a podcast at notoverthinking.com.
Good stuff. Thanks for listening and see you next week.
Bye-bye.
That's it for this week. Thank you for listening.
If you liked this episode, please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the Apple Podcasts website if you're not using an iPhone. There's a link in the show notes.
If you've got any thoughts on this episode or any ideas for new podcast topics, we'd love to get an audio message from you with your conundrum, question, or just anything that we could discuss.
Yeah, if you're up for having your voice played on the podcast and your question being the springboard for our discussion, email us an audio file MP3 or voice note to hi@notoverthinking.com.
If you've got thoughts but you'd rather not have your voice played publicly, that's fine as well. Tweet or DM us at @noverthinking on Twitter, please.
Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.